transnational organised crime. Now, I've taken this literally from the financial crimes lecture because it links in, and it's really important to me that you can see the links between these different activities, and that most of the organised criminal activities that are transnational in nature are not separated. So I'm trying to really draw these together. It's not so much a group of separate units or separate topics that we're looking at. What we're really talking about is more of a spider web, where you have the transnational organised crime groups in the centre, and they have like all of the aspects of the web, the tendrils of the web going off in different directions, and then you have the interconnections between those. So think of it more as a spider web as opposed to separate incidents on a continuum almost of organised criminal activity. So from the financial crimes lecture, in 2004, Australia ratified the UN Convention against transnational organised crime and the protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea and air, which is known as the Smuggling Protocol. The convention provides a global approach to preventing and combating transnational organised crime. So here we see the two sides of it. It's about the prevention and defeating it, not just about dealing with the smugglers when they arrive at Australian borders or some European borders or US borders, etc. The purpose of the convention is to criminalise offences committed by organised criminal groups, combat money laundering, which is why it's taken from the financial crime lecture, because the two go hand in hand. Where is the money that's being paid to these smugglers going? Well, it's being laundered and it's being entered into other criminal activities. And to facilitate international cooperation in the fight against transnational organised crime. So we can see here the fact that we're talking about the smuggling protocol and that we've linked very closely the international cooperation to fight transnational organised crime, that this is one of the centres, this is seen as a key organised criminal activity that is transnational in nature. The Convention also enhances the effectiveness of domestic measures by providing a mechanism for the cooperation with a wide range of other countries in preventing, detecting and prosecuting transnational crimes. Now that's important in this case because people smuggling, as mentioned on a previous slide, has low rates of detection and certainly prosecution. So for the people smugglers this is fairly low risk but high profit. Australia also participated in the first conference of state parties under the Convention in 2004, showing will on Australia's part. I mean, this is a big problem for Australia, although we have fairly controlled borders because obviously we're surrounded by sea, unlike other areas, for example Europe. If you think about trying to travel through Europe, you've got roads, which is going to be a lot easier than stopping people land by sea. Saying that, obviously Australia has a huge coastline, so if people want to breach the borders along the coast, there are plenty of areas in which somebody can actually land a small boat taken from a bigger boat and people can actually gain access to Australia by sea. The UN Convention against Transnational Organised Crime continued. The Smuggling Protocol has key elements of a global approach to prevent and combat transnational organised crime. And I keep putting these things in red because I really want you to understand how important the smuggling aspect is in transnational organised crime. And obviously, as we're talking about links to other aspects of the unit, the people, we talk about that spider web, the people who are smuggling people are also smuggling guns and drugs, ammunitions, the illegal animal trade, so animal products from endangered species. So it's really not just about the people smuggling, but also about the transnational nature and the organised nature in which they're smuggling lots of different items or indeed people. The purpose of the protocol is to prevent and combat people smuggling, to promote cooperation among state parties, which will include anyone signed up to the protocol, and under UN I think that's around 190 countries at the moment, and to that end protect the rights of smuggled migrants. Australia has extensive domestic policies and legislation designed to combat people smuggling, and Australia's ratification of the Smuggling Protocol demonstrates the commitment to working with other destination, transit and source countries on the issue. And that really covers the three aspects of this. So the source countries of the Iraq, the Lebanon, etc., some of the African countries, The transit countries may be those through Europe or other African states or other Asian countries. Destination countries are primarily those that are seen as the wealthiest countries, and therefore the most likely to provide a better lifestyle, and also for the smugglers, wages for the people being smuggled so that they can take the financial gain at the other end. There's no point smuggling somebody to a poor country where they're not going to be able to get a job or they're going to earn really low wages. So they're really aiming for the wealthy, developed nations of Australia, US, UK, etc. In 2003, Australia announced the intention to ratify the protocol to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, known as the Trafficking Protocol. It forms a comprehensive package of measures to combat transnational organised crime, and it supports Australia's work as co-chair with Bali, the Bali process on people smuggling, trafficking in persons and related transnational crime. The Australian government has taken an active role in promoting regional cooperation to break down criminal networks responsible for transnational crime. So this is recognised at a very high level as a very significant problem. In terms of Australia, why people smuggling threatens all Australians. So how does this actually impact on you? There's maybe something that you've never really thought about. A lot of the areas we've talked about in transnational organised crime, identity crime certainly, financial crime, all of these impact on us. Even the maritime crime, if you think about the financial implications, I think about 90% of world goods are moved by the sea. So if we have pirates holding goods hostage, asking for ransoms for goods to be released, these costs impact on all of us. So if we're talking about people smuggling, how does that impact on potentially all Australians? Well, provides air or sea access. So this is looking at the security and criminal concerns when people are arriving in Australia who are not properly identified. We all go through, or most people in Australia travelling will go through the high security at the airports or sea terminals, wherever. Now, obviously, you can't take certain objects with you. Your identity is logged at that stage. So the enforcement agencies know through those channels who is in Australia at any one time. That adds a level of security. We need to know who's crossing the borders to assure the security and safety of all Australians. There's major quarantine and health risks involved by people bypassing normal immigration controls. They could be bringing all sorts of goods with them that could have very significant quarantine implications, because Australia is the ecosystem is very specific, very well protected, and quarantine is very, very strict. However, with people coming through the borders with all sorts of items from other countries, they could bring bacteria or insects and actually decimate the Australian ecosystem. There's also the health risks for individuals. All sorts of diseases could be brought in that are communicable to humans through these channels. Apes or monkeys could be brought in. A lot of diseases can be passed through different primates to humans. So there are very, very significant health risks for anybody with the people bypassing these normal safety checks. Processing illegal immigrants creates a significant logistical problems and costs. So when people are actually tracked down, obviously you have all of the investigative procedures to track these individuals, then to arrest them, to hold them, to process any applications for asylum, process any other issues that may be associated with those individuals, especially if they're juveniles. Costs are huge, logistical problems, a lot of policing effort goes into this, a lot of legal effort goes into this. So it's having a financial impact. And also infringes on Australia's sovereignty, giving us less control over our borders. So that security issue, it's very important that we protect the health and safety of everyone in Australia. And really, when people are crossing the borders at will, then that's very much infringes everybody's rights to safety and security in Australia. But in shifting sentiment, let's look at the tragedy at Christmas Island when at least 300 asylum seekers drowned after the boat was smashed into cliff. And this has caused some Afghans to speak out. So this is actually from the Channel 9 news, and you can follow the link there to read more. So when we're talking about people smuggling, the trouble is we talk about numbers, we talk about implications, for health and safety for Australians. But what we also have to understand that the people being smuggled are desperate. Many of them come from horrendous conditions in their home countries, and the fact that they are willing to risk their lives to come to places like Australia, largely by sea, and these are obviously asylum seekers, so they're not trying to emigrate illegally, they're not trying to sneak onto the country, they're in the boats, they know they're going to be picked up by the Coast Guard, so they're asylum seekers, and yet they're taking their lives in their hands. There's got to be a very compelling reason, and it's very easy for people in the West to say, well, we have to protect our borders because we come from wealthy countries. These people are taking huge risks, making themselves in debt for years to come, leaving their families very vulnerable, often not seeing their families for years, if ever again, and there's got to be a very compelling reason for them doing that. So we need to see them as individuals as well, and look at the reasons why these people are paying smugglers to travel around the world. So we need to keep that in mind. Some methods, such as the immigration detention, have attracted criticism. Now, I mentioned this in the last lecture. Amnesty International have argued for better, economically more viable and humane ways of handling asylum seekers. Others argue that Australia remains the world's third largest recipient for refugees, and people smugglers should not decide who comes to Australia. So we're seeing the same arguments as we saw in the maritime lecture, because obviously a lot of immigration to Australia takes place via the sea. What is the scale of the problem? But it's estimated that 4 million people are smuggled for financial gain across international borders per annum. Australia's government has sought to enhance the border controls and increase international cooperation of law enforcement to cut this number down. Remember, at source, at transit, and in the destination countries, of which Australia is one of the key ones. Methods include increased maritime patrol of borders by the Australian Defence Force, technological innovations by the Australian Customs Service of offshore processing, the Pacific solution, and mandatory immigration detention for illegal migrants and asylum seekers.